Okay, we have the new meeting, we have the call to order, public input. There was no one for the hearing, so presumably there's no one now. We have the Finance Claims Committee report.
Before we get to the Finance
Yes.
Committee Claims Report,
Sure.
I'd like to recommend that Pam post the PowerPoint presentation she just went through as a PDF on the website so
Sure.
people are able to download it.
Yeah, we can do that. And I guess we can put a note in the paper that's available that way. You see the whole presentation. Okay, Financial Claims Committee?
Can I assume that her presentation is really part of this meeting?
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
With that assumption, let me just mention that the Finance Committee has met really since the beginning of the autumn period of time with Pam and Mark to work with them in association to build up the budget and to consider what the proposed rate increase might be for fiscal year 2021. It's been an ongoing process with many meetings. The last meeting with the Finance Committee was on Friday. All members of the board were invited, and it was a very productive meeting. And, without repeating everything that Pam has said, the Finance Committee obviously gave great thought to an appropriate rate analysis based upon the 10-year capital plan, and the three critical components of the thinking had to do with providing a reliable source of supply, as Pam mentioned, continued improvements to the water distribution systems, and to maintain reserves. And from the Financial Committee's point of view, maintaining ample reserve is certainly important and was a main part of the consideration of the rate increase process. In that process, various alternative rates were considered and whatnot, but out of that discourse and discussion, the Finance Committee passed a motion that I will recommend in a few minutes, that the rate increase for fiscal year 2021 be 10%. So with that information, I'd like to make a motion that the rate increase be considered by the Board of Directors of the Bristol County Water Authority to be 10% for fiscal year 2021, and that will open discussion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay.
And if members of the Finance Committee would like to start any discussion, that would be great, and if Pam would like to say a few things too.
Well,
Wonderful.
I strongly endorse that recommendation. As you look at the past year, the fact that we had the pipeline rupture, and fortunately, it was not a total rupture, which would have placed us in a very difficult situation. But the fact of the matter is that the $4 million cost totals 30% of our budget, and it was an unbudgeted repair/replacement. And we have some substantial capital improvements coming ahead, and I regard the connection to the Pawtucket water supply is absolutely essential to keep our water customers hooked up to two alternate sources of water.
I concur. I feel the same thing. We've had, that unexpected leak, and it had really taught us the fact that we have to go ahead and look to the future of getting another source. And I really feel that this 10% increase can get us ahead of the curve in case there's any other future conditions that come up that would be unexpected. So I certainly concur with the 10%.
I attended the Finance Committee meeting on Friday, and I concur as well with the reasons that have just been outlined. We've got three, to me, big ticket items coming up. One, covering the cost of the repair, which was unexpected. Pawtucket, which is a long-term but essential item, and upgrading the system continuously. And those are all substantial amounts of money, and I think getting a 10% increase in this year is essential to get a reasonable funding going forward, rather than some blip at some point in the future.
Anyone else have a comment? I think it's safe to say there's this balance between how much debt we can carry and how fast we can spend the money. These are not projects that you just give them a purchase order and it's done. They take years to complete. A couple of years to design, a couple of years or more to construct. And so having the funds available levels out the debt. And I think Mark has been very astute and with the planning, all the staff, planning how frequently we should bond, how much debt we can carry to be able to do the projects that we have in mind, and yet not overextend ourselves. And I think that this, no secret, say such a bump coming. We did this, 10 years ago, when we started a major program. We had an 11% or 11.5% increase, as I recall. And then it dropped down to the 4 or lower. And I think we're at one of these stages again, in my view, brought about largely because of this unanticipated sudden occurrence during the summer. So while it's a shock, I'm sure, to people when they see this in the paper, there's a clear, in my view, there's a clear background supporting it makes sense to do this. This sets the stage to move forward.
I agree with the position everyone has taken, but just being here for so many years, just seems to me 10% is an awful large increase at one time to hit the public. And Mark, can you give us just an idea of what an average increase that would be to the average customer? I apologize for getting in late.
10% is $4.77 a month, $57.27 a year.
Okay, that answers that question.
Yeah, $4.77, gotcha.
Considering the cost that everybody else pays for every other little thing like TV and cell phones and everything else, I think when it's the most important product you deal with, I feel we're justified in asking.
What's the new cell phone, the iPhone 11? $1,100? Whatever. Okay.
Just a quick comment.
Sure.
I concur with this, and I think that this chart here that points out what it is, because when I think 10%, you're going to take a whack. But when you realize it in this fashion, I believe that we're going to go, when we do state this and it gets publicized, that those numbers need to be published to the public, put it in the papers. We did. We are going to go a 10% increase, yet this is what you are as the average user is going to be hit with, over a 1 year period, $5 a month, as Gina pointed out. I think we need to.
2 coffees at Dunkin' Donuts over the course of a month.
No, if you get the senior one, it's 3. Sorry, I did senior. But I think we need to show the people, yes, it's 10%, which raises a flag in everybody's house whenever you do anything, but you show it and reflect it in that fashion that it's less than $5 a month. We're all taking that. So, thank you.
Would there be any more discussion?
Okay. I just want to mention that, we did a very thorough analysis on what we need going forward for the next few years. And we looked at the hit our reserves were going to take if we went with anything lower than the 10%. Because we obviously are very reluctant to go into having a fairly significant rate increase. But as you mentioned, it sounds worse than it is. But we looked at it very carefully. We did a lot of analysis. The Finance Committee, as I mentioned earlier, spent several meetings taking a look at the different options that we would have and how it would affect our budget over the next few years. And it really came down to this makes the most sense and is really needed to be able to accomplish the projects we're looking to do.
More discussion?
Any more discussion? Ready?
We're ready to vote. I think now we need one from each town at least. Is that correct, Joe?
Well, are you gonna,
We don't vote.
are you gonna adopt the budget as well, or are you gonna do the rate increase first? You need to do them both together, I guess is my question.
Oh, okay, well,
We could do it one at a time.
You want to
If you can do
amend,
them one at a time, that's fine.
The
Well, you-
setup sort of.
we could
has two
amend the
items.
motion to include adopting the budget and recommending the 10% increase.
right, that makes sense, because that puts it all together.
But
Why don't you,
Because the way we set this up is the finance committee makes a recommendation, and then items 4 and 5 are for you to vote on the rate increase in the budget. So it might make sense to do it all as one, because the
Yes.
budget is kind
So
of.
it's just amending the motion.
So then I will amend the motion to include a recommendation to the board that the operation and maintenance budget for fiscal year 2021 be approved at an amount of $8,939,867, and that the capital budget for fiscal year 2021 be approved for an amount of $13,815,000 even.
13,000 or 13 million?
13 million.
$13,815,000.
And I second that amended motion.
Okay, so you, who seconded the first one? You did too? So let's have the vote to add this. We're adding the new motion, and then we'll do it as a whole thing. That's the way we want to do it?
No, you just amended the
No.
motion.
You
then
just
can
amended the
vote.
motion.
Okay, so don't we need to put it together? It's amended. We need to vote on the amendment to put it into the motion. Then we vote on the whole motion, which is both the rate increase and the budgets.
Why don't we just do the budget? Vote on the budget.
Yeah, why don't you
Budget.
vote
Make
on the
it-
budget, let's
And
vote
then
on
go
the
on the
budget, then let's do the
increase.
rate increase.
So let's back off.
Yeah. Now we do motion.
Withdraw the motion.
Withdraw the motions, withdraw the other one, make the motion now for the budget and the capital program.
Let's do the budget first, so that we're very clear on the record. Let's just do the budget.
That
Do the
makes-
budget, the capital budget, and then the rate increase.
Yeah.
How's that?
Are there going to be three motions?
3 motions.
Three. I make a motion that the Board of Directors approve an operational and maintenance budget for fiscal year 2021 of $8,939,867.
There's a second?
I second that.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. Second
I
motion.
make a second motion that the capital budget for fiscal year 2021 be approved by the Fiscal County Water Authority Board of Directors for an amount of $13,815,000 even.
A second?
Second.
It is seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is again unanimous. And the final motion now, setting the rates that will make this happen.
And the Finance Committee recommends to the Board of Directors of the Bristol County Water Authority that the rate increase for fiscal year 2021 be 10%.
Second.
And that is seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Was there an item here under 3.2A, funding for engineering for lower dam removal? Is that something that's already included, or is that an?
It is included, I just wanted to call it out because we're applying for grants and they want to be assured that the board has approved the funding.
Which we did.
It's listed it as an additional item
Okay,
in the budget.
thank you, George, and thank the Finance Committee. I think this year was different. We had some complaints last year that we didn't have enough time, the board didn't have enough time to understand the budget. I think that was corrected this year.
Please, so.
The staff started earlier, the Finance Committee worked with it, other interested parties from the board. So while it might appear to the public that this is just sort of flying through, There's been a lot of work here, a lot of board members have been very closely involved and understand the budget in a way that when we hear a motion for the final number, we understand what's behind all that. We're not simply going along for the ride. Be that as it may, I guess we're on number 6, removal of the upper and lower Kickamuit dams, and there's a presentation by Parr.
Yes, as we're applying for grant funding, and the board has approved funding for the removal of the dams for the engineering work, we thought it would be a good idea just to catch up the board on where we are with the studies that have been done for both the upper and the lower. And,
Can you just thumb drive to this one?
yes, that's fine.
You can pull the one on the left or the right.
This one?
That's fine.
We did a presentation for, we have a dam removal committee, which involves interested parties from the town and conservation groups. We had that last fall, and since that time, we've actually done work on removal of the lower dam. So thought it'd be a good timing to see where we are.
Did make some copies of the presentation so that it's easy for you to look at.
There it
It
is.
just takes a second.
Yep.
Take another one, Bob. Bring all this paper and really keep this up there.
Well, thank you very much for having us in. It's been an interesting project. Last time we were here, we talked to you about the Upper Kickamuit Dam. That one's been in progress for quite some time. That design is advancing quite well. I'll give a quick summary of where we are with that one now. But when we left here, we also started to look at the Lower Kickamuit and said, okay, what we found last time is we have to do some off-site improvements during the removal of the Upper Kickamuit. So why not take a look at the lower and see if we can't balance off some of those improvements and what would be the impacts if the lower dam were to be removed. So in your packet here, the first page represents where we are with the design on the Upper Kickamuit. We've designed the breach through the embankment to mimic the width of the original stream channel, which we determined through bathymetric survey. We've determined the hydraulics to try to mimic the flow regime through the 100-year storm event, so that we're not changing any of the flood that occurs downstream of this dam up to that FEMA-regulated 100-year event. We've spoken with Rhode Island DEM, and in general they're in agreement with this approach. We're looking to balance off our cuts and our fills, so we're looking at possibly shaving some material off of the dam embankment. That was primarily when we were looking at one of the mitigation efforts we needed to do downstream. But again, it's a ready supply of materials that we can use. We can also look to sell it as borrowed material to possibly offset some of the match that you may all have to have. So this is where we are from that standpoint. This is just the plan showing it in configuration with Schoolhouse Road, which is one of the roads of concern. And you can see that that lower pond area, which is heavily overgrown right now, will be utilized during this removal process as a sediment treat. One of the big concerns that the public has raised and that everyone has during a dam removal is what happens to the sediment that's built up behind the dam. We want to mitigate it. So we'll be taking the dam down in stages so that we can control the release of that sediment itself, have the natural vegetation stabilize it within the impoundment. But there is a certain amount that's going to migrate downstream. We've got this nice sediment basin already built for us. All we have to do is control it. So we're going to be utilizing that during the design process. And then that will give us an area where we can then remove the sediment and then send it off-site so that we don't have it flowing, continuing on down into the lower reservoir itself. I think we showed you this slide last time, and the two areas in the kind of the brown hatch are the two off-site areas of concern if just the upper dam is removed. There is some flooding in a lower section of the roadway along Serpentine Road, and then the lawn area behind the condominium complex over here also saw some increased flooding, which I understand happens during different tidal events anyway, but by removing the upper dam and some of the storage that is there behind it, we can see increases in those two areas. And it was those two areas that we started looking at going, okay, if you take out the lower dam, does it lower the water enough that we're no longer flooding Serpentine Road or the condominium complex? And that's where we've been, and that's what we've been concentrating on over the last little bit. This is just a table that I believe you saw previously that just summarizes the existing and the proposed elevations for removal of the upper dam, showing that we've got negligible or minimal changes in the routed elevation and our overtopping depth, and in most cases it gets so at Schoolhouse Road, under the 50-year storm event, we won't have any overtopping. Under the 100-year storm event scenario, it currently overtops. We won't have any once we're done. And then over the 500-year storm event, you'll see a 1/10 of a foot change. But with 500-year precipitation, normal flooding is pretty significant at that point. So we had an opinion of cost, which was 1.45 to 1.7 million. Of that, 500 to 800,000 of it was associated with off-site improvements. So again, significant number. We wanted to look at that and see if we could bring that down. So we started looking at the lower Kickamuit. It was built in 1883. It is a water supply structure for you. It's about 130 feet long. It's got 2 tide gates. It's got a fish ladder, but it's been abandoned as a water source. So it's not.
It was abandoned prior to 2019, correct?
Not officially. We were keeping it as a backup supply.
How many years have we not used it?
8.
Yeah, since 11, I believe.
Since 2011.
Yeah. So I think that's a little misleading.
We'll definitely put in that it was taken offline in 2011.
However you have the
We'll work with the
phraseology.
language of it properly, but the official declaration, I understand, was 19, but we'll get that. So thank you for that clarification. But that's important to note because it's not really an asset for you anymore.
That's true.
Now it's just a liability. So we looked at a couple of different scenarios to kind of step into this evaluation much the same way we did on the Upper Kickamuit. We looked at what's going to happen during different rain events. We're going to look at the sediment, or we did look at the sediment to see what we may have to deal with. And then this one, there are some private wells that are located along the sides of the reservoir itself. So we found that by the 500 and 100-year events, we further reduced flooding at Schoolhouse Road, and the water level was very similar to existing conditions. The flooding at Serpentine Road goes away, and the flooding at the condo complex is reduced as well. We took some sediment tests to take a look at what we had. In general, they looked good except for copper. So we do need to do some additional sampling to see how extensive the copper is. It appears that the copper was from a previous treatment since it was a water supply. And then we looked at the private water wells. We went through the state records. Unfortunately, they don't have any records prior to 1970. So any of the older systems are not identified. But there were 22 wells in general vicinity of the reservoir. 2 of them are located directly on Serpentine Road, but we believe that there are others that are located along Serpentine Road. What is probably going to be recommended is some water quality testing. The concern isn't so much that the wells will go dry. It's more the concern of potential salt water. We want to make sure that they're far enough away so that we don't force water into there or have them draw water in once they start pumping. So that's something that still needs to have a little bit more study, but we're understanding the magnitude of what could be impacted at this time. So we also had some comments from the public about, hey, doesn't the lower dam act to keep the storm surge out? Does it provide any resilience for us? So we spent some time doing a number of studies here, and long and short, the answer is no. And I don't think it's any surprise, because you've all probably seen the water flowing back over the tide gates at different times during your high tides and your king tides. So the table that's here on the screen and the handout shows different elevations and where the top of the dam is. The top of the Kickamuit Reservoir Spillway is at 2.6. King tide that we saw is 4.05 from the Army Corps. What we saw in October of this past year was a 5.5, and we had 5.6 is the top of the tide gates. So you can see when we get down into the 10-year storm, 20-year, 50, and 100-year storm events, they exceed those elevations. So really this structure doesn't provide any of that type of benefit to the community or the surrounding areas. And in our analysis, we actually saw that for those larger storm events, we start to get water coming back around from the backside that you're not going to control with any of your infrastructure. So we looked at a project timeline if we were to combine the two structures, because ideally they would be permitted together. They are both impacting this entire reach of the Kickamuit, and they would go hand in hand. The complication is you've got two different agencies who are going to fight over jurisdiction. CRMC has jurisdiction over the lower one because it's at a tidal. The upper dam would be under the jurisdiction of Rhode Island DEM. However, once the lower one is removed, then the upper one could fall under CRMC. So one of the next steps for us will be to talk to both agencies and get them to decide who wants to pursue or review which aspects of the applications. We're anticipating that they will be able to come to an agreement. So the important things, what's the cost? We do get to save the off-site mitigation that was anywhere from $500,000 to $800,000. And that gets replaced by the cost to breach the lower Kickamuit, the LKD, estimated at 1.1. This doesn't include any environmental remediation. So one of the next things that needs to be done is to take a look at the sediment samples and see what we can do with that copper and make sure that that's not going to drive prices through the roof. So the total project, upper and lower, including construction admin for both structures, is estimated at $2.13 million.
Any idea where that copper came from?
Yes, we noticed the reservoir gets quite a bit of algae on it. Copper used to be a normal treatment for algae in the reservoirs.
So a self-imposed problem.
Yes.
In comparison, the rehabilitations are 1.56 for the upper Kickamuit Dam, and then for the lower Kickamuit, anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million. The reason why there's a big swing in the lower Kickamuit Dam rehabilitation, as we talked before, Rhode Island DEM is preparing to implement spillway design flood requirements, and we're not sure what level of improvement would be necessary at your spillway. If it's straightforward, probably looking at the 250 side. If you need to go into a larger repair, which I'm thinking you might, to get the capacity we're looking for, it could be upwards of $1 million replacing the entire spillway structure itself. Again, the timing on that, we don't know, but we do know that they've been warning everyone about it for the last 10 years. They've started to hold meetings, so I think those spillway design floods will be implemented in the relative near future. And then you also would have the ongoing operations and maintenance costs for both dams, which would add on to that. So, the dam removal still is on the, while expensive, is still slightly less than the initial repair costs, and then gets rid of the liability of owning two dams.
Plus, the rehabilitation would not be eligible for grant funding.
That's probably the more important one, yes. We'll, where is that? you've got a bunch of potential funding sources, and they like the environmental restoration, the removal of the dams. I don't know if this one's in the packet that you have. And those would not be available for a dam rehabilitation project. They'd rather see you take it out. So this does open up additional sources for you by going with this approach. Any questions? This is just showing you some of the, if you had a question on the sea level rise, this is what we had mapped out as far as showing the different flooding events. And you can see a lot coming in from over on the left side of that slide. And just pretty pictures of what it can look like all finished. And then also the benefits of restoration, because you will be restoring this back into a saltwater environment and then transitioning to brackish.
Question on the upper dam, when I first heard about it, DOT involved in that to remodify or modify that road? Is that still a player in this?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yes, they've allocated funding and they are in the process of hiring an engineer for design.
Will that impact the start or finish of this if we have to wait for DOT?
Yes, because they need to do their work first before.
So this schedule that's here is probably shifting to the right with DOT plan.
Well, actually, they're looking, this is based on DOT doing their work next year, which is the plan at the moment.
They told us during our several meetings, and you've had subsequent, that they're looking to fast track their work and move it forward. Once they pushed you all to commit last meeting,
Yes.
then they felt that they could move forward and push theirs as fast as possible.
Are both of these dams listed on the FEMA register with the failing places?
They're both listed on Rhode Island DEM's database as a dam, a regulated dam that has to be improved. As far as FEMA, they don't list them,
I
but
misspoke.
Yeah,
But I mean, they are listed and they are,
yep, and they both have repair requirements, and you just had to do some last year out at the lower one to address some embankment concerns. That took care of that NOV, and we're getting ready to take care of the other one, which was the removal of the plates themselves. So yes, those are still listed.
Pam, I have a question. If both these projects go ahead and are completed, does the BCWA still retain control over that area? Or is there going to be a stipulation where some of it might revert to the DEM, or has anybody looked at that?
Well, we'll be continuing to monitor it. We still would own the property where the dams are located. So part of the proposal is to continue to do some monitoring. We have to do the restoration work. But pretty much it will become part of CRMC's oversight for that area.
Any other questions people have? What's our next move?
So right now, we've got one application in. We're sending in another one for some funding. But we have a proposal in our agenda for the next phase of the engineering work for the lower dam. Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to catch up.
Yes.
Thank you for having me, and
Interesting presentation.
thank you.
I guess we can now get to the minutes.
Yeah, hurry up before Ray moves.
Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the Finance Claims Committee of Monday, December 16th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. for the 12-16, oh, excuse me, Policy Committee.
Move to approve.
Second? Need a second, somebody?
Second.
It is done. Further questions, discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. I think everyone responded positively. It is approved. For the Personnel Committee, December 17th,
Make a motion to be accepted.
Second.
seconded. People have seen the minutes. Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. And for the 12-17 board meeting,
I want some more correction, Alan.
let's get a motion to
Move to accept.
move to accept. Second, now.
On page 2, the motion under item 6, the last line, where Director Vitale said that she's uncomfortable approving the operating budget 4% rate increase is irresponsible, and way 2 should be an extra O on 2.
Way
Too low.
low. Got that. Thank you. Any further questions, comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Again, it is unanimous. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Executive Director's Report.
As requested, the first page will be the goals set for the year with updates for each of those goals. If you'd like to change in that format, let me know. And the typical board report. The latest was that we did meet with the mayor of East Providence. He's looking at forming a committee to move forward with the Pawtucket Pipeline. He wants to involve a couple of council people, and then we'll take the presentation to the city council. He needs to get their approval for a resolution to move forward with the engineering. So meanwhile, we're working on the engineering, and I did mention on here as well that we rather than wait for East Providence for the Phase 2 design, that we'd like to move forward with at least the first part of the design, which they can do now before it snows, and start doing some of the survey work for refining which direction to go in. Right now, the pros and cons are looking that a route mostly to the east of the city looks the most doable, but they need to refine those pros and cons with a little further investigation.
And when you start your engineering tasks and so on, and if East Providence joins us, it would obviously be a shared cost for the same engineer. They wouldn't hire a separate guy to go in and do it, they would.
Well, we're proposing that we share the same engineer,
Yeah.
yes. What they may decide to do may be something different, you
Well,
never know. But we've discussed essentially that they would share the engineering costs with us, with this engineer.
That was certainly the tone of the joint meeting that we had with them.
Yes.
Do they have their own engineer that do this type of work for them, under contract now?
Not for this project.
If they must have somebody for the water system there that's.
They have
They're going
their,
to like Paris, power
they
engineering.
use, like we do, they use a variety of engineers. They'll use PAR and CDM typically. And in this case, we did a proposal and we selected Beta as having the best, we thought, proposal for the project that we were looking for them to do.
And when it comes up like that, I just worry about a conflict between two engineers. And then there would be a conflict all the way down the road as you, who's the right one to pick.
No, well, we have an award to Beta that we did award, and we have discussed with East Providence that they share the costs on that I think Beta's done an excellent job on the design for phase one, and we've offered that design to East Providence for comments. And they've had a few, but I haven't heard anything where they've had any issues with the engineer at all.
And they saw the presentation by Beta, and they were
Yes.
appreciative of that. So I think they've been sort of tied in on that.
I concur with that. I'm just saying that if they have somebody that they.
I guess it could happen, as Pam says. They might make a change, but
Your costs might be impacted.
it looked like they said, yes, we're buying into this.
Okay.
That this looks reasonable, we have these three areas we need to evaluate for the phase two. We're gonna pick up some of the costs, and we'll share that with you. That was the comment that was made. So it was, I mean, it wasn't even sort of almost offhanded, just straightforward arrangement.
As I said, until we sign, we don't know exactly what they'll do, but that's how the discussions have
That's,
gone.
okay. Thank you.
If anyone has any other questions?
Any questions about Sue or Randy's additional reports? Okay, it looks like Mark is up.
Sue, are you gonna look at the things here and give us any updates on the gate chart?
I did update it. I added a few bullet points under Pawtucket Pipeline Phase 2, a few more categories on the left-hand side, as well as a few more down on the Hope Street Pump Station, as far as dividing each project into a few more line items.
So the lot is purchased and we're all done with that?
Well, I purchased corner lot goes out a little past today, so.
Oh, okay, so tomorrow the purchase lot will be done? Is it?
We have the purchase and sales. We're going through the planning board in Bristol for the subdivision, and that should be available fairly soon. And that's all we need now is to set a closing date. So we're looking, I don't know, maybe a couple more weeks to finally close on the property. But we're starting the engineering work to do the demolition and to set up, get ready to do the remediation work on the property, the tank site area.
Thank you.
All right. Mark?
Hello, everybody has the November statements in
Yes.
their packets, and I sent them previously as well. And it's been an up and down year, to say the least. The revenue numbers we've had for October, November reflect a good choice we made by leaving the water on with the leak going for the summer to allow people to use as much water as they really needed. And those sales numbers, where we're in quarterly billing, are reflective in October, November for the July, August, September period.
Right.
So that was the good part. We're still, go to page 11, if you have it handy, where I can look at dollars billed. We're still behind the 8 ball where we normally are. Despite the 4.5% increase in rate, our dollars through the end of November for 9 months were only up 0.35%. So basically that whole 4.5% has been taken out of the picture through consumption. If you look at the chart below, it kind of, you add those together and there's your 4.5%. We're down 4.4% in consumption. So the increase of the 4.5 is reflective in that. So you can never say you increase 5% or whatever that you're gonna collect that.
Right.
So we're in a year that I'm working on December now. but it might, December, January, February are not the big months of consumption. So I don't expect us to bounce all the way back, but we might pick up a little bit.
Not unless we have 65 degrees on a continuous basis.
That's never gonna happen in January.
Yesterday.
The rest of it also too, you'll notice, requested at the last meeting on the budget pages, I included the detail of the budget, starting on page 7. So I did rather than a condensed version, which I usually give you a comparison, I did the line-by-line item comparison of the sections. You normally just get the group totals of each of those sections. But most things are really salaries and wages. You can see I'm within 0.5% of what the budget was. Expenses, within 1.5 points. So the biggest factors we have are the variables which are in the revenue area.
Right.
Our expenses are pretty well documented across the board. Insurance, we met with the insurance company. We won't be getting a proposal on insurance until the middle of February. So we put some, not sure where that's going to go. So we'll see. I tried to put in enough to cover a worst case scenario on most of those issues. So I think that gave everybody kind of a clear indication when you're looking at the O&M budget, the line item and everything of where we stand. I'll have December statements probably in about a week. In addition, with the voted on 10% rate increase, I will update the budget to show that 10% in the revenue portion. And I'll resend copies to everybody once I put that in.
Fair enough.
Mark,
Question?
on
Sure.
page 4, line 51, depreciation and amortization went down markedly from 18 to 19. What was the reason for that?
The big difference,
From 213.
I know, I looked at that the other day, and now I forget.
That's one of the things, you don't expect that to change suddenly.
Right. There was something in there reflective of, well, just in November, I know what it was. In November last year, the cost of the amortization of the cost of issuance of the bond last November is in that month. We used to depreciate the cost of issuance over years. Now you take it immediately. Okay? If you look at for the year, that's why when you look at just a month, geez, I surprised myself, I remember that. But if you look at the year to date, I did break it down. That's what I did. On page 5, you can see I broke down the bond issue costs about a little more than halfway down on page 5.
Right, yes.
You see it?
Yep.
So at the time I saw that, I said, I'll break it down on the year to date so you can kind of see how those reflected. Appreciation, went up just about with the right rate. We have a lot of new vehicles in the system now that depreciate fairly fast, so.
No surprises, though, overall.
Pardon?
Overall, there are no surprises.
No surprises,
And that's-
everything we expect.
So I had a question before we got to the finance report, which was from the information technology report, backflow tracking. Do we do backflow inspections ourselves as opposed to outsourcing those to certified backflow inspectors?
No, we don't do those in-house, we source those out, but we're setting up a new backflow monitoring program, in which case we do have to have licensed surveyors. We actually do go in and check for hazardous areas that will require backflow, and actually the new plumbing code requires backflow even on residential properties now, and we have to track all of those. And for the ones that are testable with the backflow preventer, we have to notify the customer that those have to be inspected, and then we have the forms online that they can fill out and send back to us, and we have to track those.
Do we charge for that?
No, we don't.
Shouldn't we?
As far as something we could look at.
I think we should, because otherwise, we're passing that cost along to everyone.
Well, as far as the survey work, we have to do everyone. As far as the testable ones, those are typically more commercial properties or properties
But
with
what I'm
hazards.
not understanding is the testing, in my experience, backflow and certified backflow inspectors do the testing.
No, actually, they're two separate categories. We have one person that's a certified inspector, which means they actually determine if the backflow device itself is working properly. We do not do those for customers. We do our own in-house. But for survey is for our operators to go in, anytime they go into a house, they would look to see if there's, for possible cross connections, if there is a backflow device there, or if they should have a backflow device. So they would essentially fill out a form that's already on their tablet, and that would go back to...
Well, let's assume that there is a need for a backflow device, and there is no backflow device. What happens then?
And then we notify the customer that they need to have one installed.
And then what?
And then we track it to make sure that they get it installed, and then send us the information.
So there's follow-up, and there's record keeping, and there's a time and expense.
Yes. there is.
Do
So
other
we have to estimate
agencies make a charge for this? Are you aware?
Not that I'm aware of, but a lot of agencies are just getting their programs underway as well.
I think that's something we should look at.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I suspect others are charging for that.
Well, it's something we can estimate what our time is involved in doing that.
I'm assuming you have to have a tickler system, you notify them, you give them 30, 60, 90 days, then you need to contact them again. Then they need to supply information to you. I'm assuming you need to make a copy of that electronically and keep it. So you can show that you followed up appropriately.
Yeah, periodic inspections.
And then we'll have an annual report back to the Department of Health as well.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, we're on to number 10, which is the task order for engineering services for the design and permitting for the removal of the lower Chickamauga Dam.
Make a motion to be approved.
Is there, that motion is
For the task force.
for $100,800, correct?
Yes, sir.
The Pear Corporation. There's a second.
Do you want to do it for that exact amount, or do you want?
Well, that's what they're gonna give the pair for the rest is the combination.
Well, my recommendation was up to, oops.
You wanted 150?
No, I was actually going to recommend 120. Or up to, or you can make it exact, but just up to 120.
Up to 120. So you modify the motion to be...
Make a motion,
Up to
modify
120.
my original motion to raise it to $120,000.
That's the Pear Corporation.
Second.
Seconded. Okay, all those, further discussion? None, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Negatives, no, it's all unanimous.
And you're looking for a motion on the Pawtucket Pipeline Phase 2 preliminary investigation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to get to number 11 before you make the
On that, as
motion.
I mentioned earlier, rather than wait for East Providence to join in the engineering project, that we get it started, and we'll keep track of the costs separately. And once they join us, we'll bill them for the costs that we've incurred
Okay, so that's,
for their share.
all right, I want to see how say your motion again, please.
Just for us to move forward with the preliminary investigation of the pipe alignments for the engineering of phase 2.
Okay, but shouldn't that be in accordance with some,
The budget or an amount?
That's in accordance with their proposal,
okay.
which they submitted in 2017, and they have.
What dollar amount are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that's,
I mean, I'm happy to make a motion.
yeah, we need to
but
have
it needs
sort
to
of,
be specific.
yeah, nail something down, so at least we have an up to number, or not to exceed number. Whatever you
I believe it
feel.
was $30,000 for this first phase,
All right,
It's phase 2.
for the first phase of phase 2.
Do you
okay.
believe it is, or?
We're talking about the preliminary investigations, because we had it divided in half at $15,000 each for.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that we approve up to $30,000 for the Pawtucket Pipeline Phase 2 preliminary investigation of the pipe alignments
By Beta Corporation.
by Beta.
Right, second to that?
I'll second it.
Second. Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. It's passed. Number 12, you have the information to fill out the evaluation of the executive director. And at the same time, you can, on the next page, put down your goals, primary goals for the coming fiscal year. Attached to that is a list of accomplishments. It's Pam's way of saying, I had these 4 goals, here's what I've done against the goals, so that she's giving you her input on that. And what I would appreciate you doing is returning this for the next meeting. You can send it in sooner, or see that it comes back to Sid. The process that we've used in the past, Sid and I gather this material, we combine the material, we will come back to the board with a combined analysis showing the board what everyone has decided is the performance evaluation for Pam, and what everyone has decided are the principal goals for the coming year.
Can I request that we get this electronically?
Yeah, I guess you can. Is it the kind of thing that we can, are they PDFs so you can fill it out, or do you,
Well,
once
if
you
you
start
have a-
that, you destroy the?
Well, if you have a,
It's a Word document.
you can either send it to us in Word, or if you have a program that permits us to
Yeah.
fill in a PDF, you can do that.
If you can do that, that's fine. I'm struggling with that in a program and working on in Barrington. It's a,
Unless the PDF is set up that way,
Yeah.
it's a disaster.
yeah,
Maybe
because you
we'll-
start modifying the document. But any way you can do it, any way you can get it back here, by hand, by camel, by electronics, just get it back by the next meeting so that Bill and I can put it together and we'll work with you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Pam, in your explanation of the meter installation, you note the additional cost of billing monthly. Does this mean, is this going to be a net gain or loss financially?
Financially, it will cost more. The biggest benefit is to the ratepayer to be able to get a monthly bill. It's good for us to have the cash flow. We don't have a huge issue with that. But especially by having renters, it will make things a lot easier. But that's one thing that the board would need to discuss. If you want to go to monthly billing, to keep in mind that there is a cost for that.
But at the same time, going to monthly billing puts us in the same league in terms of the other utilities, the major utilities. They bill monthly. And so customers are perhaps more accustomed to the monthly billing instead of the quarterly, aside from the psychological impact of, you don't think about it's 3 months worth, oh my God, I got this giant water bill, so. And besides, like 4 or 5 years ago, we said we're gonna move to monthly billing, so I guess we could always change our minds on that. Okay. Executive session. Is there anything that we're not gonna talk about tonight, Mr.
I don't think we're gonna talk about Bristol, unless you want to.
Do we look like we want to?
No, there's really nothing,
We did send the letter,
Yeah,
and
there
not
was a
in
letter.
Happy New
response.
Year to you too.
yeah, I mean,
There was a letter sent.
you know what, leave it on. We'll,
I would like to discuss it.
okay.
I would like to discuss it. Okay, so then, for reasons, security records under Rhode Island General Law 42465A3, North Farm litigation 42465A2, Providence Water Rate filing litigation 42465A2, Town of Bristol paving ordinance 42465A7 and 42465A2. And to deal with the executive session minutes of 12:16 and 12:17. I need a motion to do that.
So moved.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. So it is recorded that at 16 minutes to 8, we are going to go into executive session. We will be returning from executive session. Do you anticipate? Yeah. We may have another item on the agenda, the Town of Bristol paving ordinance, board correspondence, and the next meeting. So there'll be some potentially minor activity after we come out of this executive session. We're ready to go. We'll declare a minute recess. We'll take a vote. We're going into executive session. We raise our hands, so we're there. Go. Back in open session is 8:34. Motion to seal.
Motion to seal the records of the executive session.
Second, all those in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. It's noted that Gina left the meeting, is not present now for this portion of the meeting. Town of Bristol paving ordinance, there's nothing to say on that at this point. I understand they have yet to have a meeting of the month. Board correspondence, you have some notes that show you that Providence is in the process of raising their rates. And we've already talked about that. Our next scheduled meeting is the 27th of February. Any other questions, comments?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. 8:35, it is done.
Thank you. I think you'd be able to make